What you are seeing at this moment is a man about to be condemned to death. This is Heinrich Jöckel, a high-ranking Nazi officer who had been arrested by the United States Army in January 1946. The Americans handed him over to the Czechoslovak authorities, who immediately subjected him to a trial. In the footage, you can see him in the dock, trying unsuccessfully to defend himself against the terrible accusations brought against him. Witnesses who appeared in court testified that Jöckel had overseen the terrifying concentration camp of Terezín. The evidence against him was so overwhelming and brutal that the judges decided that the only possible fate for the accused was the gallows. On October 26, 1946, he was led to the scaffold. The Czechoslovaks had prepared a simple wooden platform facing a tall post. There, they tied Jöckel with a belt and then immobilized his feet and hands with a rope. The executioner passed the noose around his neck and waited for the signal to carry out the execution. When the authorities gave the order, the condemned man was left suspended in the air as the rope pulled upwards, breaking his neck and killing him instantly. There were no tears shed for Heinrich Jöckel, and rightly so. As the highest supervisor of a concentration camp, he was responsible for some of the most inhumane crimes in history, even deceiving and tarnishing the reputation of the International Red Cross. Today, in this episode of Military History, we will tell you the macabre story of the commander of Terezín. Heinrich Jöckel was born on July 10, 1898, in the small town of Offenbach am Main, Germany. When he was 15 years old, he dropped out of school and worked as a rural laborer. During World War I, he served as a soldier, although the details of this time in his life are not precisely known. It is possible to assume that, like many other veterans of the war, Jöckel was extremely disillusioned by Germany's surrender and the establishment of the Weimar Republic. For this reason, he was drawn to the radical ideals of Nazism, which proposed violence and hatred as solutions to the problems of the German people. In 1931, he joined the National Socialist Party with the hope of putting an end to democracy, liberalism, and communism. At that time, Hitler's movement was achieving success after success. It was triumphing in elections and was able to attract a large part of the German population. Once inside the party, Jöckel began an upward career that took him to the highest levels of the Nazi hierarchy. In 1933, he was admitted to the SS, the elite organization of the regime, and 5 years later, he was promoted to the rank of Hauptsturmführer, that is, captain. With the outbreak of World War II, our protagonist took great care to stay away from the battlefield. Instead of engaging in combat, he became involved in the establishment of the concentration camp system, the sites where the Nazis sent their enemies and victims. Jöckel was sent to the Sudetenland region in Czechoslovakia to oversee the establishment of 2 forced labor camps. There, he gained renown for his good administration and his ability to keep the prisoners in check. He was not a particularly cruel man, at least not according to Nazi criteria, but he was methodical, cold, and organized. One of the places under his charge was a former sugar refinery, which was used by the Germans as a reformatory, that is, as a site to send political opponents of Nazism to serve as slaves. According to the twisted ideals of National Socialism, the experience of hard work would teach the inmates to behave in a submissive and obedient manner. This is exactly what happened, and there were never any rebellions in the sites managed by our protagonist. In June 1940, after his successful management in the camps of the Sudetenland, the SS appointed Jöckel as the supervisor of the Terezín fortress, located north of the present-day Czech Republic. In the past, this site had been an old prison of the Habsburgs, the Austrian monarchy. In fact, it was where Gavrilo Princip, the man who shot Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and initiated World War I, was imprisoned. The Nazis converted the fortress into a shelter for political opponents, saboteurs, and members of the resistance captured in Czechoslovakia. In 1941, the German High Command decided that Terezín would fulfill a new function: to be a model ghetto. By that time, the Third Reich had begun the mass extermination of Jews, and stories of murders had spread throughout Europe. The discredit that fell upon Germany was enormous, and for this reason, Hitler decided that it was necessary to dispel rumors of brutality. To do this, Terezín was promoted by the Nazis as a paradisiacal settlement. Official propaganda spoke of the fortress as a resort to which the most important Jews would be sent, such as artists, decorated military personnel, businessmen, and intellectuals. Let's look at one of the government advertisements. In the images, you can see that the site was portrayed as a peaceful place, with people smiling, playing cards, reading, and conversing animatedly. Those selected to reside here traveled dressed in their best clothes, as they truly believed in the official messages that described it as a dreamlike landscape. They were convinced they would be treated exclusively, as if they were staying in a luxury hotel. The illusion shattered from the moment of arrival as they realized the fortress was overcrowded. It had space for 5,000 inhabitants, but there were a total of 50,000 men and women residing there in overcrowded conditions. Diseases and epidemics were commonplace, food was scarce, and the prisoners didn't even have adequate blankets to protect themselves from the cold. It is estimated that between 50 and 100 people died per day due to the terrible living conditions. As if that weren't enough, surveillance over the inmates reached the extreme where they were not allowed to write more than a couple of letters per month, and it was strictly forbidden to keep medicines not prescribed by the site's doctors. Heinrich Jöckel had established that the punishment for anyone daring to violate the fortress's rules was death. Let's see the testimony of Vera Eden, a survivor of Terezín.
Because there was a lot of sickness in Terezín, even in our group. I had a scarlet fever and I was hospitalized for 6 weeks. And I had jaundice. There were fleas. Everything was dirty. But we did the best, being young.
In 1944, the International Red Cross announced that they would visit the fortress. Rumors circulated that all kinds of abuses and humiliations were being committed against the inmates inside. So the organization decided to investigate the matter on their own. Jöckel knew perfectly well the importance Terezín had for Nazism. It had been advertised as a paradise for Jews, reflecting Hitler's supposed mercy towards his enemies. To maintain the facade, the commander initiated what he called a beautification project of the concentration camp. The first thing he did was to order the deportation of 5,000 malnourished and sick people. They were mostly elderly and children who had been reduced to bones due to lack of food. Since that was not a pleasant sight, they were transferred to the east, away from the view of the investigating commission. The charade did not end there. Jöckel had the path that the Red Cross members would follow remodeled and filled with well-maintained tents, wooden benches to sit on, and playgrounds. Freshly baked bread and vegetables were distributed among the prisoners, things they hadn't eaten in years. They were also dressed in better clothes, as if it were a gala event. Of course, they were also ordered to keep their mouths shut and not to mention the horrors that were happening there, under threat of death. On the other hand, Jöckel gathered a group of musicians among the prisoners to organize a concert for the Red Cross. When the investigating commission arrived at Terezín, they found an idyllic world, completely removed from the allegations of human rights violations mentioning terrible crimes. There were children playing, couples holding hands, and people smiling everywhere. There was nothing to indicate that the fortress was hell or that what they were witnessing was a mirage. The visit concluded with the orchestra playing Verdi's Requiem before 2,000 people, including inmates and administrative staff of the camp. Jöckel's deception was a resounding success, and the Red Cross delegation ended up affirming that the prisoners of Terezín lived in excellent conditions. Our protagonist remained in charge of the fortress until May 1945, when the Third Reich collapsed. By that time, the Red Army of the Soviet Union approached the concentration camp to liberate it. Jöckel's last order as the general supervisor was to condemn 53 people to death, who were executed in a mass shooting. Subsequently, the commander fled with his wife and daughter. He sought refuge in Offenbach am Main, his hometown, although in January 1946, U.S. troops located him and arrested him. As we mentioned at the beginning of the video, he was handed over to the Czechoslovak authorities to be tried for war crimes. Ironically, throughout this process, Jöckel remained imprisoned in a cell in Terezín, the same camp where he had been master and commander. Meanwhile, it became clear that the International Red Cross had been grossly deceived, and that all kinds of atrocities were committed in the fortress he directed. On October 26, 1946, when the truth of the accusations against him was proven, he was executed by hanging. Thus concluded the story of one of the most cynical and ruthless commanders of the Third Reich. We have reached the end of the video. Leave your comment in the box below and don't forget to subscribe to our channel to learn about many more military events that left their mark on history.